Hi, everyone. This is another video podcast about the coronavirus outbreak and the different implications of the coronavirus outbreak. And today we're going to talk about implications or effects of the coronavirus epidemic on higher education. And so I have with me today Sean Mooney, who is the Dean of the Paul O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, and Seth Friedman, who is a health economist and professor at the O'Neill School. So I think we'll just jump right in, and I think we should start. I'm hoping that Sean will just tell us a little bit about what things have been like from the Dean's office perspective. Just as a bit of background, the O'Neill School, like the rest of IU and almost every other university in the United States, shifted all its classes online all of a sudden, and we sent the students home on spring break and they didn't come back, and now we're teaching all our classes online and everybody lives in a bedroom in their house and teaches their class that way. And that's my experience of the coronavirus teaching situation so far. So what has that been like? What are things are working out and what's not working out, and what do you have to say about it so far?
Well, it's certainly been really interesting, Cody. It's definitely a once in a lifetime opportunity, and to be honest, I think I would hope that I only come to this once in a lifetime. But you asked me what it was like in the dean's office, and I'd say it was rapidly changing. And so, when this first started out, we didn't really have much of a perception of how long we would be online for, or really how serious things were, or the number of things that we would have to change. And so I would say that every day was a real lesson in crisis management and communication. And I sort of feel that all of us in the Dean's office learned a lot over the first 2 weeks. And so when everyone broke up for spring break, we ended up really having just full meetings every single day for all of spring break and for the next week, which was our extended spring break, essentially trying to understand the different changes that we would need to make, who gets to stay in the building, who needs to go home, what kinds of tools do the faculty need to move their courses online, do we have the bandwidth, what kinds of training could we provide, and then of course trying to reach out to the students so that they were prepared for what was going to happen as well. And so it was a case of things rapidly changing, and sometimes you'd make a decision and then you'd find like a couple of days later that actually that wasn't really the right decision, and then you had to backtrack and kind of keep going. But I'd say overall it has worked out much better than I thought it might do in the early days, and I guess as both of you are living it as well, you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, from my point of view, it has worked out better than I would have guessed given short notice, and maybe that's just lack of imagination on my part, both in terms of like how flexible people could be and how surprisingly sturdy some of the basic tools that we're using heavily for online teaching and for just collaboration. Zoom and other sort of video conferencing tools work pretty good, and they don't crash as much, or they don't seem to be as hard for new users to figure out how to use as you might have guessed. Like that stuff sounds like it could be a big hurdle, and I think it hasn't really been. I do think sometimes students and other faculty sometimes seem fairly stressed about the entire experience, and I'm not so sure if that's something to do with teaching online and not having kind of a close connection in the same way. So you can't be like, hey, this assignment isn't any different than before. It'll be fine. Let me show you this. That they feel like more like they're on their own or something. So maybe it is just inherently more stressful to be distant, or maybe they're just stressed because there's a giant pandemic and like they live in their mom's basement again, and like it's catastrophe.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate these two, but I think that kind of thing has come up a bunch just in the beginnings of classes or in little email exchanges. People seem more panicked about small details than they used to, perhaps.
Yeah, you know, I think there's such a wide variety of experiences. I think that's one of the really interesting things, because I think that you have, you know, some both faculty and students for whom it's almost business as usual, like it doesn't really feel that different. And then, you know, you have a wide variety of people for whom, you know, that this is just creating enormous stress in their lives. And, you know, so I think, you know, some faculty that maybe have, you know, significant childcare duties now at home, given that everybody's homeschooling, you know, and of course everyone's situation is different. You know, it might depend how many parents there are in the home and how many children you have and what ages they are. And then the same, you know, for students, you know, who have, you know, so many of them, you know, have been asked to leave their residence halls. You know, do they have a place to go home to? And then, you know, I think the sort of the differential financial resources that many people and many students have, you know, so, you know, I think and I think you're right, you know, just the whole stress of the coronavirus, I think really affects some parts of our student body really quite significantly. And then for some others, really perhaps not quite so significant, you know, not as much at all. So it's really interesting, you know, as you say, I think some people, there's just a wide variety of reactions.
How much do you think, when this was first starting, a number of people mentioned that moving online could be really a big disadvantage for some students who might, you know, do a lot of their work at the university, like at the library or in a dorm room or something like that, and that when they go home, it's not like they're homeless, but either the environment isn't that conducive to sort of studying, or they maybe don't have you know, the technological resources they need. Maybe they don't have the computer or the internet connection required. And I had such conflicted reactions to this, because on the one hand, I think for the most part, my students seem to be fairly technologically, like, I don't know, heavy users. It is hard for me to imagine that it must be a tiny minority of them that, you know, don't have an internet connection. So I think that, and then I sort of stopped and thought, like, if I were an undergrad right now, like, and I was going to school where I grew up and this happened, so if, you know, if I moved back to my parents' house, I'd have been totally screwed, I think, because even now the internet connection at my parents' house is useless. Like, it makes the dial-up noise. It's not technically dial-up anymore, but like, you have to connect to the internet and it makes this squirrely noise, and you totally can't stream video like this. So I mean, I don't think I would have had a great difficulty, I think, participating in these courses. Now, probably I could adapt, like maybe I could pay some money and get a better internet connection somehow, or move somewhere. I don't know, but in the short run, it would have been difficult to arrange.
Yeah, I think that's
the problem. I mean, is that one of the examples where the dean's office is trying to help people deal with that, or has that been a minor part of things?
So it hasn't been as broad spread as we thought it might be, but there's definitely sort of more of a rural-urban divide. Just if you look at sort of the digital connectivity across the country, I think where the students live might influence their ability to, as you say, to be connected. And then of course there's the international student dimension too, because of some of the censorship in some countries, as you know, that makes it more difficult to get into some of the resources, just to access the web, essentially.
Have international students mainly gone home, or are most of them just still here?
So it's kind of a mix. So I think that the majority have gone home, but there's still quite a considerable number that elected to stay. And I think that probably, again, for a variety of reasons, that people elect to stay, that maybe you actually couldn't afford to go home, or the borders were already closed,
Right.
or, and I think that perhaps some anxiety about, well, if you leave, could you come back and return to your studies after you've really invested so much time in that? And so again, just a real variety of experiences there, but there are still quite a few international students remaining here.
Do you or the university have any sort of data or surveys of students trying to understand these barriers, or is it just sort of who we hear complaints from that sort of gives us a gauge on how much problem there is?
So the university has been doing surveys, and in fact, we actually did a survey of our own O'Neill students recently, and interestingly, well, of course, only those that could receive the survey did actually respond to the survey. So I will admit there could be some response bias.
I did a survey of my students. I did a survey of my students, and there were a handful that said, this was before they even really started, that they would have internet problems at home. So I haven't followed up with them. I actually did an anonymous survey of my students, so I don't even know who they were. But it will be interesting to see how things play out. I actually have a teaching assistant who lives in Bloomington in an apartment, and he's had problems because the use of internet in his apartment building has gone up so much that each individual apartment has less bandwidth right now. And so so it may not even be just the rural urban aspect of it.
Sure, it could be whenever you have a shared connection.
Yeah.
So what would you say, like, and this is for both of you guys, like, if you had to think of something either that you didn't anticipate and it turned out to matter a great deal in a bad way, or that you thought of this and you thought it would work and it just totally didn't work, like, what was the catastrophe here? I think in general it's worked surprisingly well, but there must be things that you're like, that sounded like it would work fine, and man, did it ever not work okay. Like,
I think very much to be determined on, from my perspective, like teaching a class. Like I teach an undergrad class and a graduate class. In the undergrad class, I have tried to kind of move to a mostly asynchronous kind of style where I pre-record some lectures and have discussion board assignments and things like that. And it kind of felt awkward making those videos, so I don't know how they will kind of come across.
Like, we'll see by the end of this year.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, and then when we've been meeting once a week live, which we've only done so last week. We haven't done so this week, and it's a health policy course, so I figured it's natural to talk about COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the policy responses. And so far, it's been hard to get a read, I think, on sort of how well this is going to go. They seem interested. They really want to know about what's going on, but they're also kind of quiet and hesitant, I think, to kind of have a big discussion about it, because I think everyone's a little bit anxious. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
And do you have thoughts on this, Sean?
Well, I'm probably going to jinx myself now because now you asked that question.
Because there's nothing, you were like, it's really gangbusters, like, fine, no problem.
I think I'll tell you what I think one of the most disappointing things was, that I think for a while that we did hold out hope that we would be able to have all of our lovely celebration ceremonies at the end of the semester, and I know that ultimately it was, clearly it's the right thing to do, not to bring people together. But I'm so disappointed for our students that they don't get to have that celebration. And so, I think something that we're working on right now is, well, how can you do something that's makes people feel special and acknowledges that this has been a tremendous achievement for those that are graduating this year, but in a different kind of way. So I'm not quite sure how that's yet going to work out. But
that is sad though, and that is a hard thing. I think in lots of ways, the video stuff combined with effort in other areas is a surprisingly good substitute for a lot of things. But like just celebrating and saying congratulations and well done and things like that, it's just worse in a letter or in a video conference, isn't it? I mean, it's very hard to substitute for that, at least in the short run. Maybe one day culturally we'll all adapt and it'll be fine and you'll feel good when someone tells you on a TV screen that you did a good job. But yeah, that is a drag. That's a good example, I think. It's not really some kind of mix-up. Just the fact that you have to cancel it sounds like a real cost, and it's hard to recover it or substitute to something else.
Yeah.
So what do you think about a lot of universities have now I don't really understand completely the rationale for this, but a lot of universities, including IU, have had have various policies towards changing the grading scheme to be a kind of pass-fail arrangement of some sort. Like at IU, we call it SF grading, right? What do you make of that? Why do you think we want to do that? Is it a good idea? Are there weird incentives that it creates? What's your take on SF grading?
So do you want me to answer that, or do you want Seth to jump?
Either one of you. That was meant to be a nerdy microeconomics question, but I realize it's also maybe a policy question for you. I don't know. I'm not asking you to talk about what to do at the O'Neill School. I mean, in general. What should we do? Something about
practice
that requires pass-fail grading? I don't know.
Yeah. In practice, that's like what they wanted to know on the first day of class. Like,
yes.
What was the deal with this? But I don't have a sense yet what the demand is right now. And I think there are probably a lot of students who like want the grade, right? They want, the effect on their GPA under the assumption that they're going to do well in the class, right? And others who probably expect to be doing poorly might choose the SF grade. What I don't know is like, who's the complier? Like, who's the person who like needs the SF grade because of the situation, right? And I don't know how we're going to sort of observe that. I don't have a good sense yet.
Even there, that's a good way. That was a good way of framing it. So I, like you, had a lot of conversations with students I blocked off a chunk of my class time where we just talked about random stuff. And this is what they wanted to talk about a lot, was SF grading. And most of my students were, I agree, I didn't have people hold up their hands and be like, do you want it or do you not want it? But it seemed like the room favored SF grading pretty strongly. Mm-hmm. There were a few people that were like, I have this like military scholarship or military aid thing. It has to be a letter grade. I can't get SF grading or I'll lose it. So like that woman was against it, for her at least, right? But a lot of people seem to be in favor of it, but I couldn't quite get a handle on what they thought was so good or logical about it. I guess like you suggested, maybe it's just that they think it'll be nicer than what they perceive as a low mark. It's unclear what problem it solves to me, but I don't know.
Well, I think I've had more questions about this one topic than anything.
The students want to talk and talk about it. Like, I mean, it went on for a long time in my class.
And the faculty is as well.
Yes, look, we're doing it again right now.
Yeah, this is universal. It's actually coming from all sides, and I think it's a real thorny question, because of course some, as that some institutions have just mandated that they go either pass, fail, or SF, for everybody.
Fancy universities have really gone in that direction. Like Harvard is all pass fail grading for this
And
semester.
I think a lot of law schools actually have gone in that direction too. You know, I think that we've sort of walked the middle line, you know, in as much as, you know, that they're going to be people that there's going to be a lot of people that don't like it for many different reasons, because it walks the middle line. And I'm not sure what there probably isn't a right thing to do in this case, but you know, but I think the rationale was because I think we were uncertain as to how students would be able to make this transition. Right. Some of the uncertainties about technology, some of the uncertainties about connectivity, some of these other things that we just really spoke about. So in a way, it sort of is a pressure valve reliever, you know, and I think in a time when people feel incredibly stressed and are probably more likely to just become increasingly stressed as we move to the end of the semester, it sort of provides this sort of release, essentially. But, you know, interestingly, I've had students write to me to complain about the existence of SF and to say, you know, that I do not want to be forced to take an SF because I've worked super hard for my grade, and I, you know, I want my A at the end. So, you know, so again, it's like
exactly.
everything.
I'm surprised more of them don't say that, but maybe they do. They just don't say it.
They don't say it in your class because your class is hard, Cody.
What's that? Oh, my
they don't say it in your class because your class is hard.
But I'm such a soft grader. They never believed me, but I try to tell them that, but they wouldn't believe me even then.
So, you know, so for some people, you know, it'd be quite it would not be advantageous to not have a grade, because some people have been looking to increase their GPA, and of course, if they were doing super well in the class, it's very disappointing for them to get an S. But then, of course, on the downside risk, you can, I think that you can cushion the downside of a GPA by taking an S. So perhaps it depends on where you are in that distribution, because you want to take all the upside, but now you have a cushion for the downside.
Yeah. I went and read through this. There's a funny little economic theory paper by some faculty at the Kelley School of Business.
Oh.
They have a paper called Course Grades. It's like a pun. And they talk about under what conditions does a coarser grading scheme, you know, yield more socially optimal outcomes. And I was like, I remember this paper like really vaguely when our little email exchange sort of began about this, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll forward everybody this paper. And then I like read the paper, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not forwarding this paper to anybody. I don't want to, but it's not quite on point. But if you're interested in this, you should go look. This is this question of like, suppose you had a voluntary certification regime, so not licensure, but the government will certify you as a qualified whatever occupation you want to have. If you want, but you're allowed to practice and be an uncertified person if you feel like it. In that case, having something like pass-fail grading might induce more people to participate and therefore increase overall quality of high-quality providers in the marketplace. That's their main takeaway. I was like, it doesn't directly apply to just a general university course, but that was their view. And this is sort of, you guys have touched on this, like, you know, the incentive, the person who wants a coarser grade might be someone that's would have a relatively low grade in a fine grading scheme, right?
Well,
that's
and
their story.
What we don't get in this case is like selection into classes because of it, because it's happened in the middle of the semester. So like
too late
we won't observe if somebody takes a hard calculus course that they would have been dissuaded from taking, but now they feel okay taking it because they have that, you know, sort of insurance.
That's a really good interpretation.
But they're locked into the courses already. So yeah.
Yes. If we always did this, that would be a takeaway from this paper, perhaps, or an application, that you'd get more people who are not confident math students taking some math courses, and maybe you view that as a good thing. Like, why do you only want the math geniuses to take math courses? That's a good point. Yeah. But switching in midstream doesn't get you that.
Yeah.
Maybe it would stop people from dropping out entirely, though.
Right. I think that there might be students who might think, well, I just can't handle this. I'm going to take an incomplete, or I'm going to withdraw from the class and try
this might
again
stop
later.
them from
But
doing
now
that.
they might feel, okay, I can muscle through and get through with
There you
Yeah,
go.
a
That's good.
different bar. Yeah.
I agree with you, Seth. I think it is definitely a form of incentive to keep going towards the
Yeah.
end, in a time when we've had some disruption, and it could be that people might become, some people might become discouraged, and I do
Yeah.
feel it's an incentive just to keep going towards the end, and to say, well, you can finish this.
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. So we should now talk more about not current events, but about like prognostications for the future, I think. So if we think about like the medium-term future, like the coming summer, fall, and next spring semester, what do you think is coming? What's an issue for higher education in terms of things like demand for undergraduate programs, graduate programs, or maybe different kinds of programs? And maybe what do we think is going to happen to the sort of short-term budget situation for universities? We should talk about that. Do you want to get us rolling, Seth? Do you have? I feel like we're every question. I keep giving questions. I should stop doing that. That's not fair.
I was gonna say that question definitely sounds like Sean's department.
I know, but I mean, you're economist. You can do anything.
Yeah. I mean, if we have a recession that lasts into next year, right, we might think it might shift the demand for different types of education. In particular, like graduate education. I actually don't know much about how undergraduate education gets impacted by these kinds of recessions, but we might see people who are having trouble finding a job just go and go get that master's degree that they had been hoping to get at some point. So maybe that's good for a place like the O'Neill School, who has a lot of graduate students. On the other hand, I guess there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, we don't know what's going to be happening in the fall or next spring in terms of the pandemic. Maybe it will rebound, and so maybe people might be take more cautious choices about what to do. Maybe they're just going to wait and see what happens when this is all over before they make those kinds of decisions. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, Seth. I mean, I think we normally expect in an economic downturn that people do retreat to education, and they want to improve their skill set, and they want to improve their marketability in some ways in the job market, or to retool because there not be those get a new set of skills. But I do think that this is, I hate to keep using the word unprecedented, but it is a bit of an unprecedented time, I think, because we're just so uncertain. I mean, there's a great uncertainty, clearly, what happens in the future. But, something that I've been speculating, which is related, but to this question, is, I've been speculating a little bit about what the demand for careers more in public service and non-profit management might actually be in the future, because I think that we've definitely seen more of a resurgence in investments to provide a bit more of an economic safety net, such as the paid time off, and potentially providing checks for a large swath of society so that they can afford to pay their bills, so that you can keep some businesses open for the future, so that they can hire again in the future. And I just wonder if but potentially if we might be at the beginning of a large social transition, where society itself really changes, or has a bit of a sort of change in direction. That's just speculation on my part.
Yeah, and schools of public health probably will. I mean, lots of students will be attracted to those kinds of programs as well, I think.
I feel like, given a few years, there's going to be some fun TV shows about epidemiologists. And that's got to be great for a school of public health, A lot of people, almost in every kind of dimension that people start talking about the epidemic, you hear a lot of just, I think it's just the scale of and speed of the sort of effects on the overall economy and just daily life. People seem to make a lot of references to World War II, just in that, like, not only that the war period itself was this enormously disruptive period for domestic economies like in the US and Canada and things like that, but also afterwards, like, everything was so different. There's all these technologies that emerge, or you know, organizations that emerge in the post-war period, and they're just, you know, they're with us now still. So people keep making these analogies, and I was kind of thinking this afternoon, like, how does the situation of universities then compare to now? And I didn't make it very far because I don't really know very much about history. So, but my sense is, like, they probably utterly nearly collapsed, like, during the actual war period, because the students were, I mean, they were still there, but I mean, like, the students were like at war, a lot of them are, right? So, like, the demand for undergraduate degree programs surely was much smaller. And then, of course, it like flung back in enormous scale when everyone came back. Universities got built and things like that during this period. So, like, I don't know, are there lessons to that, like to just what it is to do a big change in the economy for universities? Or is it just different that this time we don't lose the faculty or the students to some external threat, but they can't come to campus in the same way? They have to do it from their living room or something. I don't know if that's a productive line of thought or not. But.
Well, you know, I think that I think the institutions probably are going to have to think a little bit more about, and they already are, I think, but thinking more about sort of how we deliver some of our educational content. And, you know, we talked about, you know, I mean, certainly online has been around for quite some considerable period of time, but you know, can we do things really differently that might serve our population a little bit better, or differently? Are people going to demand you know, different modes of instruction, you know, perhaps shorter classes, or maybe less of an on-campus experience, you know, or do you get this backlash where people really want to be together? It's kind of, it is sort
really
of interesting.
hard to decide what to make of that part of it. Like one thought is like, if you think about social interactions through the lens of, like, negative externalities, then one view is, man, have we ever underestimated the social costs of any kind of large event, travel between locations with no weird quarantines or checks on anybody's health, like, all that stuff. It's delightful. It has enormous immediate payoffs for the people. But, you know, it presumably carried with it this enormous risk of, like, of a giant pandemic all the time. We just, like, rolled the dice a lot. And then, like, this happened, right? And it's not that we had no idea about this. Of course, there have been epidemics before, and people write about this. You can go see, Bill Gates gave a TED Talk a few years ago, basically said, this happened. We should do something now. We could head it off, and we didn't do anything like what he said. But it's very descriptive, and there are lots of examples like that. So if you took that seriously, that when we come out of this, people will be more likely to have this vivid example of what that lurking, you can't see it, but it's there, risk is. And then they should all want to do less of it, or be more comfortable with somehow using public policy to discourage it in some ways. Those things all lean towards, I don't know, more online interactions of all kinds of forms, right? Fewer large events. It better be worth it if you're gonna have this large event or whatever. So I mean, that makes you think probably have more online education and more online conferences or webinars or whatever it will look like. And those may be better than what we currently have. We'll get better at it. But you know, that could happen. But then there's part of me that just thinks, no way. Like by the time this is over, people will be like, oh, that's terrible. Let's go hang out in large groups together, travel a lot, right? Like, I can't decide what I actually think people will be like when this is over.
Well, and for higher education, like certainly we'll learn now, can we do more educating online? But there's so much more to the university experience, both for research, but students as well, right? So like maybe we can do most of the human capital reasonably well online, but without the sort of social interactions, maybe there's a huge kind of decrease in the benefit of the experience, both just to utility, but even also to like future, you know, outcomes that come out of university.
Yeah,
and
like
then,
when you think of like all that work in urban economics and
right, I was just
innovation by like Enrico Moretti and those kinds of researchers. They're all like, oh man, cities are amazing. If you get all the smart people together, they accomplish so much more than they would individually. If you want to be great, go right now to Silicon Valley. Like that's the only way, or something like this. And like, you know, so that those are the positive externalities of social interaction.
That's right.
And so on that they've been writing about. There's probably going to be a total industry in economics for writing papers that are like the exact opposite of that. Now, I don't know how you overcome that though. That doesn't make it untrue that people are more creative or more productive when you put them in these sort of high performance clusters. That still seems true. And maybe human capital production is like that too. Students are better off like being with other people trying to learn new stuff.
So one way to minimize the negative externality while allowing us to keep the positive externalities is better surveillance, better public health surveillance, and you know, those kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So you could imagine like a campus like IU, still with the density, but our effort to make the students have better hand washing and and like more frequent like checks for fevers and things like that could be just rampant. It sounds so like a science fiction movie.
Better protocols for what
like
to
every
do.
day to get into the O'Neill school, you had to walk in and a thing took your temperature and was like, go home. You have a fever. Like, we won't let you in today. This would be quite a future, you know, but maybe you need stuff like that. That's just more widespread and it's all over the place. Hard to imagine, I guess.
Yeah. Or better, you know, different protocols about what happens when certain things pop up at the health center, right? When we see a pattern of an illness, right? We change
do something about it like right away.
Yeah.
Test and trace and so on.
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with both of you. I think there's going to be, or you'd hope that, I think that there's going to be more of an emphasis on, you know, reducing risk. And of course, you can never reduce it to zero. But I think, you know, we're always doing these trade-offs all the time of, you know, as you sort of mentioned that there's, you know, there's the negative of this activity and then there's the positive of this activity, and you're always doing these risk-reward trade-offs all the time. And you know, clearly right now the trade-off to social interaction, the risk is extremely high, and the reward probably is not that high right now in that trade-off metric. But I think later on, I think the risks are going to be a lot lower, and again, the reward is going to be high. So I think it's just definitely that balancing of trade-offs.
It's very interesting to think about, how do you get people to go along with various kinds of preventive activities or you know, behavioral changes that are supposed to make them safer in expected value terms. I mean, we do manage, it's not that easy actually, but we do manage to get people to try to prepare for things that sound like sudden terrible events, like active shooter or or a giant fire or a tornado. We do these things. People are somewhat grudging about it and complain about it and stuff, but like, you know, you can round everybody up and make them go stand in the basement of the building for a few minutes. We do it. We occasionally have fire drills. It's very hard to think of like what the epidemic equivalent of that is. Like, because it's not that sudden. It's not like, oh, the building's on fire, get outside before, you know, you die. It'll be more like, oh, let's pretend that this week we heard that a novel virus is emerging from some other place in the world. Everybody go online. Let's practice for a week. Like, this is so unlikely that we will do these sort of little games, but that's how you would be prepared to do this kind of stuff, I guess. Seems unimaginable to me, but it's hard to get people to take this kind of thing seriously, I think, as I think we see right now with parts of the country that are not staying home as much. But do you think that this shift to online education is a shift to a way bigger version of online education? Like about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when there were the first largest kind of MOOC courses which were being offered, there were tons of people writing little op-eds that they were like, you know, in 10 or 15 years, there won't even be any universities. Just prepare. They're all going to go bankrupt. And they'll just be these massive online courses. The cost will fall enormously. It'll be the first real productivity gain in higher education in like 1,000 years. And it'll be great. And, you know, you can make really high quality courses. Look at this machine learning course from Stanford. It's really quite good. Right. And the course from Stanford was good. Like tons of us, like you go on it and you're like, yeah, it's pretty good. Like I watch this. It's got assignments and stuff. And yet the universities function exactly the way they always have, pretty much. That they've had almost no effect, I would say, on how higher education works, at least in rich countries. Do you think this is a boost that will make a long-lasting change, or will we ultimately revert back to like brick and mortar campus with more recorded lectures or slightly better online programs, but it'll still be a minority thing?
You know, I feel that that our students really enjoy heterogeneity and choice. You know, and I think, you know, when you talk about MOOCs, I mean, certainly they definitely made us all start to think in a different way. And we're probably, you know, part of the precursor to the fact that online learning is pretty standard now, but that's definitely not all MOOCs. But, you know, I think that students really still enjoy that sort of tailored educational experience, and maybe we don't have 50,000 people wanting to take the same biology class or the same AI class. So, you know, I still believe that that there's a big role for on-campus education, but I do also believe that there is a simultaneous role for online as well, where you might be able to provide that same high quality experience to a broader swath of society that for some reason cannot come to campus. And so, and there are many reasons we can think of that people might not be able to make it to campus.
Yeah, I think that's right. It is interesting that the excitement about massive online courses kind of, you know, was not at all excited about the kinds of online courses that we're currently running as of last week.
Are very different than, yeah,
they're normal sized classes done online, so they don't have maybe they have the start of it, but they don't have enormous productivity gains, like in terms of teacher like students taught per professor, right? Basically the same ratio as before, but done remotely. That size of class allows you the same amount of like customization in theory, but not the scale of a MOOC. It's probably better than like a lot of online courses that people take seem to have like a low dose of close interaction with the the faculty member. Depends on how well it's done, I guess. But there's lots of online courses where it's just a bunch of like pre-recorded things, or maybe not even. It's just like PowerPoints, and you download them and do these readings and fill out some assignments, and like that's the whole course. That sounds somehow lacking compared to a course taught by a live person in person with some other people in the room with you. It's much richer, immersive experience. But online courses like this, maybe a lot more like a classroom course. So maybe you could see more of it. You could reach a different audience, as you said, or compete for students that are normally far outside your market. That's a kind of interesting angle. Maybe international students that you can't bring here live, but you could run courses like this for them. If there was a way to do that, you might reach a much larger audience, and it would indeed be a lot cheaper for them.
Well, and in fact, in the near future, I mean, that might well be a very good option if you think about just the closing of borders and things like that.
Right.
Things like that now, and you don't really know when all of that's going to open up. And then, you know, and I think also as we have changing relationships with different countries across the globe, either warmer or not so warm, you know, I think that we can still reach out to students in different places that might have greater difficulty coming here in person now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it's just because I've spent so much time at universities. I have a really hard time imagining what the university would look like if it was not kind of fully stocked with live in-person students. Like if, let's imagine like 75% of the students at IU are remote, and we just have a small cadre of local students. It seems like that would so change the experience of the place. Maybe it'd be fine. I don't know, really. Maybe we would expand, so we just have a lot more students total or something like that. But it would very much change the, you know, aesthetic of the place, if nothing else, or the daily feel of the place. It would be different. Kind of hope that does not happen personally. Do you think in the fall, this is again for both of you, do you think in the fall we're back in the classroom, or do you think we'll still be online? Do you have you're just like, oh man.
I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, okay.
No.
I mean, like, how can you know, of course, right? But
yeah. Well, so it will be interesting to see how universities and other decision makers like weigh the trade-off. I mean, we don't know yet what kinds of testing strategies are going to be available then or not, but like, you know, I guess from Sean's perspective, like what threshold of risk do you think the university would be willing to accept to get people back on campus and back at the football stadium in the fall and in the classrooms and things like that?
Well, you know, it's difficult to come up with a number, but I anticipate, and it would not be me making these decisions, but I anticipate that there's a very low tolerance for risk because clearly that being careless and bringing people back too early when maybe we're perhaps having a second wave of infection or something like that. I think it just has too much cost in terms of people's lives, and so I personally think that the institution will be quite risk averse in that area. That's just my thought on that.
Because it'll be interesting, because a lot of the models seem to suggest like things will kind of die out early to midsummer. So come August 1st, things might look pretty good, but then all of a sudden in September or October, it could get terrible again. And so like, it'll be interesting to see how people kind of think about that at that point.
Yeah, there's so much uncertainty, but you're right. There could be this, confirmation bias kind of effect happening.
Yeah.
If it's true that there's a seasonal effect, so that transmission rates and prevalence falls in the summertime, and then it just comes back in the fall for reasons we don't totally understand. that'd be right around the time you have to make your choices here.
That's right. Yeah.
Universities in general seem, at least on things like this, fairly risk averse to me. So I think I agree with you. I also think parents seem fairly risk averse about their children a lot of the time. They seem fairly upset about mold in dorm rooms and things like that, which is a comparatively minor public health risk. And you know, like, that was a big issue. On the other hand, there's so much pressure to just get back out there. You see articles in the newspaper like every day. People are like, but next week, let's open the schools again or something, you know? I don't know if those people are they like to say their wish out loud, or if they really think we should do that or not. It's not always that clear, but it seems like there'll be pressure in that direction as well. Just that you need to get back to normal or whatever. But
well, I mean, you know, I think most institutions have made the clear decision that summer will be online everywhere. And you know, and I also think it's sort of reinforcing of each other as well. I think, as you see, you know, you don't want to be the one institution that decided not to take care of public health and have an outbreak. And then I think, you know, that as the weeks go on, I'm sure that all of the institutions are going to be sort of updating their, you know, risk model in some ways, because of course as we get closer to the fall, we're going to have better information and we're going to be better able to forecast.
I have not heard that sounds smart to me. That sounds correct. I haven't heard yet, although maybe someone will go and do this, but I haven't heard yet of any. Universities are kind of uniquely situated in the sense that their whole status quo business model is like, let's have a whole crowd of people come and hang out here for a year. That's their plan, right? Live in close quarters and stuff. And if they want to continue in that way, like right now they're closed down. One strategy is they could invest really heavily in their own surveillance, disease surveillance technologies and strategies. And I haven't heard, it's too early yet, they're just still reeling from the whole thing probably, but I haven't heard yet of any of them making like bold plans for how they are going to be the most public health conscious campus you can possibly imagine. But if you can kind of imagine if somebody really went all in on a thing like that, like their campus literally had testing and checkup rules and a whole infrastructure for how they were going to do it, they could be the first one back open and selling the idea that, you know, it's safe and we have this whole plan, you know, test positive, you go home, right? Like we kick you out to keep everybody else safe or something. Like I'm surprised someone isn't pitching that, because if you could be the first one that could open, you could capture the market for a while everybody else was like, we're just going to stay shut down and go online. And you'd be like, yeah, I got live classes at a pretty good university, and like, here's all the stuff we're doing to make sure everybody is safe. Maybe just no one thinks, they're risk averse in the sense that like no one thinks any of that stuff will actually work very well. It's a bunch of 22-year-olds can't follow the rules, you're in trouble or whatever. So I don't know. It seems like we're coming up on the end of things. Do we have some kind of final topic we want to bring up? The one thing that we haven't touched on, I don't know if this is what we want to end on, but the one thing we haven't touched on is what this means for the sort of other big function of universities, which is the sort of research arm. Do you think this fundamentally alters things in the short run? I think a lot of research faculty have sort of reoriented at least some of their research program to like immediately relevant activity. But do we think there's some long run change in the kinds of research that's happening at universities that will be oriented towards vaccines or infectious disease or things like that? Maybe a last crystal ball conversation.
I anticipate I think you'll see some of that driven. My guess is from 2 points of view, because I think there are probably going to be many faculty that perhaps were like, oh, this is a really interesting topic, and I hadn't really thought about jumping into this before. And I forget where I read it, but I read somewhere recently, you know, that maybe it was a number of it may have been theoretical mathematicians or something that said, oh, you know, this is like a really cool topic, and now let's work on this because it's really important. So I can see that there could be the personal drive, and then I could also see that there could be a drive from funding agencies, you know, sort of a signal outside that we would like to have research on these topics. But I also fully expect that all the regular topics are just going to continue as well. I don't know. What do you think, Seth?
Well, I was thinking for whatever reason, it seems like an area where interdisciplinary work is particularly important. And so it seems like, you know, there's been a lot of push for that, both from funding agencies and universities in general lately. And so this seems like it would certainly spur that along. Like already, and Cody and I were talking about this recently, like, you know, economists are embedding epidemiological models into their economic models. And like, so there seems like a lot of scope for that kind of shift. Seems like in the short run, the biggest cost is people who have labs that are, you know, having to just halt research that can't be recovered. Like, I can always run my regression next week instead of this week. Some people can't quite run their research that way. And so that seems like a huge shame and a huge cost. But that, I mean, that's a short run cost, but yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for agreeing to do this today. And I will sign us off.
Great. Well, thanks for being such a good host. Take care, you guys.
Thank you.